Mara Whitfield knelt in the dirt, gathered the coins he'd thrown at her feet one by one, then hurled them straight back at his polished boots. "I may be poor Mr. Crowley," she said, her voice shaking but never breaking, "but I ain't for sale." The whole town watched her shame in silence. Not one soul stepped forward until a dust-covered mountain man crossed the platform, crouched down beside her, and whispered 5 words that would change both their lives forever. "Ma'am, my twins need you. If you believe a woman's worth is never decided by the man who throws her away, subscribe to this channel. Stay with me all the way to the final word, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from, so I can see just how far this story travels tonight." The train hissed to a stop, and Mara Whitfield stepped down onto a wooden platform baked so hard by the summer that it felt like standing on the lid of an oven. She carried one suitcase. It held everything she owned in the world. She had ridden 4 days across the country on the promise of a letter. A tidy letter written in a bold hand, signed Silas Crowley Rancher, Gospel Creek, Wyoming Territory. He had written that he needed a wife of good character. She had written back that she was poor, but honest, educated, but willing to work. He had sent the fare. Now she stood in the heat. 25 years old. Her dress faded gray where it had once been blue, and she searched the faces on the platform for a man she had never seen. "Miss Whitfield." She turned. He was younger than she'd expected, and finer than she'd hoped. A lean man in a cream suit, a gold chain across his vest. A hat that had never known a day of honest sweat. 2 men stood behind him like fence posts. Silas Crowley looked at her the way a buyer looks at a horse whose teeth have gone bad. "You're Silas Crowley," she said, and she made herself smile. "I'm pleased to finally—" "Stand still a moment," he said. She went quiet. He walked a slow circle around her right there on the platform in front of the freight men and the ticket clerk and 3 women in bonnets who had stopped to watch. He looked at her worn shoes. He looked at the mend in her sleeve. He looked at her chapped, sun-reddened hands. "Well," he said at last, stepping back, "that's a disappointment." The word landed like a slap. "Sir, your letter," Crowley said, "spoke of a lady. What got off that train is a scullery girl." He turned to the taller of his 2 men and said it loud enough for the whole platform to hear. "Look at her hands, Dobbs. Those are the hands of a woman who scrubs floors. I told you the East is full of liars." "Mr. Crowley," Mara's voice stayed level, "I never claimed to be rich. I wrote you plain. I said I was poor. I said I would work hard and—" "I don't need a woman who works," he said. "I have men who work. I need a woman who decorates. A wife who can sit at the head of my table when the cattlemen come to dinner. A wife whose picture I'd hang on a wall." His mouth curled. "Not one I'd hide in the kitchen." One of the bonneted women laughed behind her hand. Mara felt the heat crawl up her neck. 4 days on a train. 4 days of watching the country roll by, of daring to believe a new life waited at the end of the line. She had prayed on that train. She had rehearsed how she would be kind to him, how she would earn her place. "You sent for me," she said. "You paid the fare. You wrote the letter." "And I'm rescinding all of it," Crowley said pleasantly. He reached into his vest, drew out a small leather purse, and shook a few coins loose into his palm. "But I'm not a cruel man, whatever they say of me. Here." He tossed the coins into the dirt at her feet. They rang against the boards. One rolled and stopped against her shoe. "That'll buy you a meal and a ticket back to whatever gutter raised you," he said. "Or find kitchen work in town if the diner's hiring. Either way." He tipped his fine hat with mocking politeness. "Welcome to Wyoming, Miss Whitfield." The women laughed openly now. The freight men looked at their boots. Nobody said a word in her defense. And this is where most women would have wept. Mara did not weep. She knelt. Slow, deliberate, she gathered the coins from the dust one by one, her fingers steady as she picked each one out of the dirt. The platform went silent, watching, thinking she was taking his charity, taking her shame. Then she stood, and she threw the coins back at his boots so hard that 2 of them struck the polished leather and bounced. I may be poor Mr. Crowley, she said, and though her voice trembled, it did not fall. But I am not for sale, not for a purse, not for a table, not for a picture on your wall. You wanted something to own. I am not a thing to be owned. The silence that followed had weight to it. Crowley's pleasant mask slipped. For just a heartbeat, something ugly moved under it, something cold and calculating that had no business in the face of a man who had just called himself kind. You'll regret that, he said quietly. Then louder for the crowd. Enjoy the walk, scullery girl. He turned on his heel. Come along, Dobbs. The carriage door slammed. The horses pulled away, kicking up a cloud that drifted over the platform and settled on Mara's faded dress, on her tired shoulders, on the last of her hope. The women drifted off. The freightmen went back to their crates. And Mara Whitfield stood alone in the summer dust with one suitcase and not a single coin in a town where she knew no living soul. She would not cry. She swore to herself she would not cry. But her chin quivered and her eyes burned, and she pressed her lips tight and looked down at her ruined shoes so that no stranger would see her break. That was when a shadow fell across her. Ma'am. She looked up. He was the biggest man she had ever seen. Not fat, there wasn't a soft thing on him, but broad through the shoulders and tall as a barn door, dressed in dust-colored range clothes that had gone gray with the miles. A 3-day beard. A jaw like a chunk of granite. Eyes the tired brown of creek water in a dry year. He held his hat against his chest with two hands the way a man holds his hat in church or at a graveside. She stepped back on instinct. I don't have any money, she said quickly. Whatever you're selling, I ain't selling nothing, ma'am. His voice was low and rough like it didn't get much use. I was standing by the freight wagons yonder. I saw the whole thing. Her face flamed. Then you saw enough. You can move along like the rest of them. No, ma'am. He didn't move. I reckon I can't. Something in the way he said it made her look at him again. That man, he went on nodding after the carriage, just threw away the only honest person on this platform. Every other soul here watched a woman get shamed and went quiet as church mice. You're the only one who spoke a true word, and you're the one they laughed at. He shook his head slowly. That ain't right. That ain't right at all. It doesn't matter whether it's right, Mara said, and her voice cracked at last. It's done. He was my only reason for coming out here. I have no money, no family, no... She stopped herself hard. I don't know why I'm telling this to a stranger. Because I asked, he said simply. Name's Elias Boone. I run horses up in the high country, half a day's ride north. Break 'em, sell 'em. Haul supply wagons for the settlements when the weather lets me. He paused. I come down for feed and salt once a month maybe. Wasn't planning on anything more. And now? He was quiet a long moment. His big thumb worked the brim of the hat around and around. Ma'am, I'm going to say a thing, he said, and I'd be grateful if you'd hear it out before you slap me. Despite everything, something in her almost wanted to laugh. I have never slapped a man in my life. Well, there's a first time coming for most things. He drew a breath. I got 2 children up on that mountain, twins, boy and a girl 5 years old come autumn, Samuel and Nell. His voice changed on the names, softened, roughened both at once. Their mother's been gone near 2 years now. Took by the fever the same winter we lost half the cattle. I buried her under the aspen where she liked to sit. Mara's anger drained out of her all at once. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it. I'd do my best by him. Elias went on. And now his eyes weren't on her. They were somewhere far off up where the mountains were. God knows I do. But I'm a hard man and a quiet one, and I don't know the first thing about braiding a little girl's hair, or what a growing child ought to eat, or how to answer a boy when he asks where his mama went. I've got a woman comes up twice a month from the settlement to help, but she's old and getting older, and she can't come through the passes once the snow sets in. He stopped. His throat worked. Nell asked me last week why she don't have a mother like the other children. I didn't have a thing to say. I just held her till she fell asleep. The platform had gone very quiet around them. Mr. Boone, just a minute more, ma'am. Let me finish it, or I'll lose my nerve. He looked at her, then straight on, and there was no guile in it at all. No leer, No calculation. Only a tired, honest desperation. I ain't asking you to be my wife. I'm asking you to be their mother, or to try. Room and board honest, pay your own bed and your own key to your own door. I'll not lay a hand on you nor ask a thing improper. I need someone who's got a good heart and a strong back and some sense in her head. And ma'am, I just watched you throw a rich man's money back in his teeth rather than take charity you didn't earn. He shook his head. That's the kind of woman my Nell ought to grow up watching. My twins need a mother like you. And I'd rather beg a stranger on a train platform than watch my babies grow up wild. Mara stared at him. She had come west to be a decoration. She had been rejected for having working hands. And now here stood a man who wanted her because of those hands. You don't know me, she said. I could be a thief. I could be a liar. I could be everything Crowley said. Crowley said you were poor and had rough hands, Elias answered. Ain't neither one a sin where I come from. His mouth almost curved. And a thief don't throw money back. She looked down the empty road where the carriage had gone. She looked at the ticket window and knew she had nothing to buy a ticket with. She looked at the town beyond the platform where every soul had already watched her humiliation and would remember it every day she lived among them. Then she looked at the mountains rising blue and enormous in the north, where a stranger claimed 2 motherless children were waiting. I have conditions, she said. Something flickered in his tired eyes. Name 'em. My own room, my own door that locks. You said it and I'll hold you to it. Yes, ma'am. Honest wages paid regular. I'm not charity and I won't be treated as such. Yes, ma'am. And if at any time I decide the situation isn't decent, you'll carry me back to this platform yourself, no argument. He set his hat back on his head and for the first time held out his hand. It swallowed hers whole. You have my word, Miss Whitfield, Elias Boone said. On my wife's grave and my children's heads, every word. And Mara, who had learned that afternoon exactly how much a rich man's promises were worth, found that she believed this poor one completely. She never could say why. The wagon was old, but sound hitched to 2 mules named She Would Learn Job and Patience. Elias handed her up onto the seat as gently as if she were made of eggshell, then loaded her single suitcase in the back among the sacks of feed and salt and flour. They rode out of Gospel Creek in silence for a long while. Mara watched the town shrink behind them and told herself she felt nothing at leaving it. The lie held for nearly a mile. He'll say things about me, she said finally. Crowley, in town. He'll say things about both of us, Elias agreed, eyes on the road. He always does. You know him. Everybody in this territory knows Silas Crowley. Elias clicked his tongue at the mules. Come out here 4 years back with a fat wallet and a fatter opinion of himself. Bought up the old Halverson spread, then the Pruitt place when Pruitt went under, then half the water south of the creek. Buys land like other men buy whiskey. Can't ever have enough. He paused. Wonder sometimes what he's so thirsty for. He's cruel, Mara said. Under the manners. I saw it just for a second when I threw the coins back. His face, it wasn't just angry. It was like a door opening on a cold room. Elias glanced at her, and there was something new in his look. Respect, maybe. You notice things. My father was a school teacher. He taught me to read faces same as books. Said a face'll tell you the truth a mouth is trying to hide. She looked down at her hands. Small good it did him. Or me. Reckon it might do you a sight of good up here, Elias said quietly. She didn't understand him then. She would before the summer was out. They climbed as the afternoon wore on the road, turning from packed dirt to rutted track, to little more than a suggestion between the pines. The heat did not break with the height, only changed its flavor dry. Now resinous the air shimmering above the rocks. Twice they passed dry creek beds where water should have run. Once they passed the bleached bones of a steer half buried in dust. Bad summer, Elias said, seeing her look. Worst drought I've known up here. Springs going dry all down the valley. Wells failing. Ranchers losing stock they can't water. He shook his head. Country's dry as a Sunday sermon and twice as long. But your ranch has water. He was quiet, a beat too long. We manage, he said. She filed that away the way her father had taught her. A face'll tell you the truth a mouth is trying to hide. And Elias Boone's face just then had gone careful. The sun was low and red when they crested the last rise, and the ranch came into view below them, a low log cabin, a barn that had seen better days, a corral where a half-dozen horses lifted their heads at the sound of the wagon, and off under a stand of aspen a small white cross. And two small figures came flying down the slope hollering, "Papa, Papa's home!" Elias's whole face changed. Every hard line in it went soft. He hauled back on the reins and was down off the wagon before it fully stopped, and he caught them both up, one in each arm, a boy and a girl, and they clung to his neck and talked over each other so fast Mara couldn't make out one word in three. And Miss Ada let the biscuits burn Papa. They was black as coal. And I found a snake, Papa, a real one, and Nell screamed. I did not scream. You screamed. Whoa now, whoa! Elias laughed an actual laugh, rusty as an old gate, and set them down. Where's Miss Ada? Sleeping, the little girl said. She said her feet hurt, and she had to set. Well, Elias straightened. He put one big hand on each small head, and then gently he turned them to face the wagon. Sam. Nell, I've brought somebody home to meet you. The two children went still and stared up at Mara. The boy was all knees and elbows and suspicion, a shock of dark hair falling in his eyes. The girl was smaller, quieter, with her father's creekwater eyes and a tangle of hair that hadn't seen a proper comb in some while, and she had two fingers in her mouth and was watching Mara with the frank, unblinking attention only small children can manage. Mara's heart, which she had spent the whole afternoon armoring against everything, cracked clean open. Hello, she said, and climbed down from the wagon her own self before Elias could come around to help her. She crouched down low right in the dust so she was small as they were. My name is Mara. What are yours? The boy stuck out his chin. I know my name already. I'm sure you do, but I don't, so I'm asking. That seemed to strike him as fair. Samuel, he said. This is Nell. She don't talk much to strangers. That's all right, Mara said. Neither do I when I first meet them. It takes me a while to decide if I like a person. She looked at the little girl. You take all the time you need, Nell. Nell took her fingers out of her mouth. She studied Mara with those enormous eyes. Then she pointed at Mara's dress. You got dust on your dress, Nell said, her first words to the woman who would raise her. Mara looked down at herself at the dust. Crowley's carriage had thrown over her. The dust of the whole long road. The dust of the worst day of her life. I surely do, she said. A whole town's worth of it. But you know what my mama used to tell me about dust, Nell? The little girl shook her head. She said dust washes off. It's the only kind of dirt that always washes off, no matter how much of it a person throws at you. Mara reached out slow and gently smoothed a wild curl back from the child's forehead. You just wait for a little water, and it comes clean. Behind her she heard Elias let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 2 years. The cabin was clean but sparse. A man's house, missing a woman's hand in 100 small ways she catalogued without meaning to. There was a single trunk of a dead woman's things, pushed into a corner and never opened. There was a child's drawing pinned to the wall, a stick figure with a triangle skirt, and under it, in a child's crooked letters, Mama. Mara looked at it once, and then made herself look away. Old Ada, the settlement woman, woke from her chair with a snort, took one look at Mara, took one look at Elias, and said, Well, it's about time, Elias Boone. I've been telling you for a year. These children need a woman. She heaved herself up. You feed her yet. She's thin as a rail. Feed her. And with that pronouncement she gathered her shawl, accepted Elias's arm to the door, and let him hand her up onto the little cart that would carry her back down to the settlement before full dark. Miss, Ada said to Mara before they left, gripping her wrist with a surprisingly strong hand. Her old eyes were sharp. That man out there has had a hard road, and those babies harder. Don't you come up here to break 'em worse. I won't, Mara said. See that you don't. The old woman's face gentled a fraction. But if you're the real article, and I've a feeling you might be, then God sent you up this mountain, girl, whatever you think brought you. You mind that. Then she was gone down the dark track, and Mara stood in the doorway of a stranger's cabin in a life she had not lived that morning with 2 children looking up at her wondering who on earth she was. She fed them. There wasn't much cornmeal and a little bacon and the last of Ada's unburnt biscuits, but she made it stretch and she made it warm, and she got Nell to eat by making the spoon fly like a hawk, and she got Sam to eat by daring him. He couldn't finish before she counted to 20, and she counted very, very slow. Elias watched all of it from the corner, saying nothing, his coffee going cold in his hand. When the twins were fed, she heated water and washed the trail from their faces and hands. And she found a comb, and she sat Nell between her knees by the low fire and worked the tangles out of that wild hair, slow and patient, humming a low tune under her breath, a tune her own mother had hummed a lifetime and a country away. Nell fell asleep against her knees before she was half done. Mara looked up. Elias was watching her with an expression she couldn't name. His jaw was tight. His eyes were wet, though he'd have died before he admitted it. She ain't sat still that long since her mama passed, he said very low. Not once. Children can tell, Mara said just as low, her hands never stopping in the little girl's hair. They always know who's really looking at them and who's just looking past them. She knows I see her. Elias set down his cold coffee. He came and crouched beside them, and he looked at his sleeping daughter. And then he looked at Mara, and for a moment the hardness was gone from him entirely. And he was just a tired man who'd been alone too long. I don't know how to thank you, he said, for coming. I keep waiting to wake up and find you was a fever dream. Don't thank me yet, Mr. Boone. Mara smoothed the last of the tangles free. It's been 1 afternoon. Wait and see if you still want me here come the frost. I'll want you here come the frost, he said, with a plain certainty that startled them both. Then, seeming to hear himself, he stood up, fast, cleared his throat, and busied himself with the fire. Your room's through there, he said gruffly. Was going to be a sewing room, ain't much. Got a lock on the door like I promised. I'll carry the little one to her bed. He gathered Nell up so gently the child never stirred, and Mara Whitfield, rejected that very morning by a rich man who found her worthless, went to a small clean room with a door that locked in a poor cabin high on a mountain, and she sat down on the narrow bed and finally let herself cry. But they were not the tears she had swallowed on the platform. She could not have said that night what kind of tears they were. She woke before dawn to a sound she couldn't place, a rhythmic creaking out beyond the cabin. She dressed and stepped out into the gray cool of the morning to find Elias at the well, working the crank by hand, drawing up a bucket. Except the crank came up too easy, too light. He tipped the bucket. Barely a swallow of water darkened the bottom. Mr. Boone! He turned fast, startling, and set his big frame between her and the well almost without thinking about it. You're up early, ma'am. So are you. She came closer, and this time she really looked at the well, at the tightness in his shoulders, at the near-empty bucket in his hand. There's no water. There's water. He said it too quick. Well's just low. It's a dry year, I told you. Mr. Boone? Mara stopped in front of him. My father taught me to read faces, remember? And right now yours is telling me that a man who told a woman on that platform he'd give her honest work and honest pay is fixing to start their acquaintance with a lie. Elias Boone looked at her a long moment in the gray light. Then his shoulders dropped, and he seemed of a sudden very tired and much older than his 36 years. The well's near dry, he admitted. Been going down all summer, faster the last 2 weeks. And the whole valley's in drought, so that's just the season. That's what I told myself. He set the bucket down. But the spring up the draw, the good one, the deep one that's watered this land 40 years, it's dropping too. And springs like that don't drop in a drought, Miss Whitfield. Not that kind. That's mountain water, snowmelt water. It don't care what the summer's doing. He stared off toward the rocks where she'd learned the spring lay hidden. It's dropping because somebody's making it drop, and I can't for the life of me figure how, or who, or why a man would want my water bad enough to— He stopped. To what? Mara asked. But Elias had gone, still staring past her at the corral. She turned to follow his gaze. The corral gate stood open, and the horses, the half-dozen horses that were this family's whole livelihood, were gone. No, Elias breathed. Then he was running. No. Mara ran after him, her skirts gathered in both fists, and they reached the corral together, and Elias stood in the open gate with his hands hanging useless at his sides, staring at the empty pen, and the churned dust, and the single-cut length of rope lying in the dirt where the latch should have been. They were here last night, he said, his voice gone hollow. I checked 'em myself before dark. The gate was tied. I tied it. He picked up the rope. It had been cut clean through with a knife. Somebody let 'em out. Somebody came up here in the dark while we slept and cut my gate and drove off every horse I own. Crowley, Mara said. It wasn't a question. No? Elias shook his head slowly, but he didn't sound sure. He rejected you at the station same day I brought you home. He couldn't have known there wasn't time to— He didn't do it for me, Mara said, and even as the words came, she felt the cold logic of them clicking into place piece by piece, the way her father had taught her to reason a thing through to the bottom. Listen to me. You said your spring's dropping, and springs like that don't drop in a drought. You said somebody's making it drop. And now your horses are gone the very first night. She caught his sleeve. Mr. Boone, what if the horses aren't the point? What if somebody wants you off this land and taking your horses is just the first push? A man on foot on a mountain, with no way to haul supplies, with 2 children to feed and a dry well. How long could he hold out up here? Elias stared at her. Not long, he said quietly. Not long at all. Then that's the plan. Not to attack you, to strand you, to dry up your water and steal your horses and starve you down off this mountain nice and slow until you give it up yourself and call it your own idea. She let go of his sleeve. Who wants this land, Mr. Boone, enough to do all that, and patient enough to do it quiet? And high on the mountain in the gray of that first morning, with 2 children still asleep in the cabin behind them and the summer sun just beginning to burn the ridge to gold. Elias Boone said the name they were both already thinking. Crowley. The empty corral did not answer, but far down the valley, faint on the still morning air, came the sound of a single rifle shot, and then nothing at all. Elias turned toward the sound, and his hand dropped to his hip where no gun hung, and Mara saw his jaw set like stone. Get inside, he said. Bolt the door. Keep the children away from the windows. Mr. Boone? Please, ma'am. He was already moving toward the cabin, toward the rifle she'd seen above the door. I don't know what's coming up that road, but I aim to be standing between it and my children when it gets here. Mara did not go inside. She followed him to the door, and when he took the rifle down and turned to argue, she was already reaching past him for the box of cartridges on the high shelf. You'll want these loaded, she said, if you mean to stand between anything and those babies. My father taught me to read faces, Mr. Boone. She met his eyes, and hers did not waver. But my grandfather taught me to load a rifle, and I have not in one single day on this mountain decided that I intend to hide in a corner while trouble rides up your road. For a long moment, Elias Boone looked at the woman a rich man had thrown into the dust 24 hours before the woman. Nobody in Gospel Creek had thought worth a single word of kindness. Then he handed her the box of cartridges. No, ma'am, he said. I don't reckon you did. The cartridges rattled in the box as Mara's hands worked, and Elias watched her thumb 3 rounds into the rifle before he stopped her. That's enough loaded, he said. You keep the rest. If they come, you don't fire unless I fall. You understand me. Not unless I fall. And if you fall. Then you do what you have to for those children, and you don't waste a single shot on grief." She held his gaze. "I understand you, Mr. Boone." They stood at the door together, listening, but no riders came up the road. The single rifle shot down the valley was not repeated, and after a long while, the morning settled back into its stillness, and the sun climbed, and the children woke. Sam came stumbling out first, rubbing his eyes. "Papa, why are you holding the gun?" Elias set the rifle back over the door in one smooth motion, easy like it was nothing. "Shooting at a hawk that was eyeing our chickens," he said. "Missed him. Go wash up. Miss Mara's fixing to make you breakfast, I reckon." Mara took the cue without a beat of hesitation. "I am indeed. And I'll wager neither of you can wash behind your ears well enough to fool me. I check." Nell's face appeared in the bedroom doorway. "Nobody checks behind the ears," she said, deeply suspicious. "I do. It's the first thing I check." Mara set the cartridge box high on the shelf out of small reach, moving as though her whole world hadn't tilted an hour before. "Behind the ears is where a person hides the truth about themselves. Go on." The twins went grumbling, and the moment their backs were turned, Mara looked at Elias, and Elias looked at Mara, and neither of them said the thing they were both thinking, which was that somewhere down that mountain was a man who had cut their gate in the dark and driven off everything this family owned, and that the day had only just started. The horses were the first thing. Elias went out after breakfast to track them, and Mara watched him work the ground around the corral, crouching reading the churned dirt the way she read faces. He came back grim. "2 riders," he said low so the children playing near the well wouldn't hear. "Drove my stock down the north draw before dawn. Tracks are half a day cold. By now they're either sold scattered or shot." He rubbed a hand down his face. 6 head. My whole string. That was 2 years of breaking Miss Whitfield. 2 years of work gone in one night while I slept not 30 feet away. "Can you get them back? Get them back." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "From who? I don't know who took 'em. I got no proof it's Crowley. I ride into Gospel Creek and accuse the richest man in the territory of horse thieving, and you know what happens? They laugh me out of town. Or Crowley's men catch me alone on the road home." He shook his head. "No, ma'am. A man in my position don't get things back. A man in my position just tries not to lose more." But Mara was already thinking 3 moves past the horses. "How much of your feed did we haul up yesterday?" she asked. He frowned. "Month's worth. Why? And your salt, your flour, your powder and shot. All of it came up on that wagon. All of it's here now in the barn." She turned toward the barn, and something cold walked up her spine. "Mr. Boone, if somebody wanted to strand you on this mountain, truly strand you, they wouldn't just take the horses. Horses you can walk without for a while. They'd take the thing you can't replace." She was already moving. "They'd take what's in that barn." Elias reached the barn a half step ahead of her and hauled the door open. The feed sacks were slashed. Every one. Someone had gone down the row with a knife opening each sack from top to bottom, and the grain had spilled and mixed with dirt, and she saw as she stepped closer with something darker. Someone had emptied a can of coal oil over the whole ruined pile. The flour was fouled. The salt block had been carried off entire. And on the barn's center post, driven in with a knife, was a scrap of paper. Elias pulled it free and read it, and his face went white beneath the trail brown and then dark red. "What does it say?" Mara asked. He didn't answer. "Mr. Boone, what does it say?" He handed it to her. The letters were crude, block-printed the hand of a man disguising his hand. "This mountain ain't fit for children. Take them somewhere safe while you still can." Mara read it twice. The paper trembled not from the wind, there was no wind, but from her own hand, and she made herself still it. "That's not a warning," she said quietly. "That's a threat against the children. He knew they were here. He knew there were children on this mountain. He knows everything that happens in this territory," Elias said, and his voice had gone to gravel. "He's got men in every settlement, at every crossroad, in the freight office, in the assay office, likely in the sheriff's office too. That's how Crowley works. He don't come at you with a gun. He comes at you slow from 6 directions at once, till you're so surrounded you can't tell which way to fight. He took the paper back and folded it, and put it in his shirt pocket over his heart, like a man saving up a debt. But he made one mistake with this. What mistake? He put it in writing. Elias looked at her. You said your daddy taught you to read faces. But you read papers too, don't you? Contracts. Documents. That's the real reason Crowley threw you off that platform, ain't it? Not your hands, your eyes. He looked at you and saw a woman smart enough to catch him. Mara went still. She hadn't said that to him. She'd only half thought it herself on the platform in the moment his mask had slipped. How did you? Because I watched his face, same as you watched it, Elias said. I was standing 30 feet off, and I saw a rich man look at a poor woman and go afraid. Just for a second. I couldn't figure it then. I figure it now. He tapped the pocket where the note sat. He's afraid of people who can read the truth. And now he's got 2 of them on this mountain. It should not have warmed her in a ruined barn, standing over their poisoned winter stores. But it did. They had 2 weeks of food stretched thin if the drought didn't worsen, and the well didn't fail entirely. They had a rifle and a box and a half of cartridges. They had no horses and no way to buy more. And they had somewhere down the mountain a patient, wealthy enemy who had just announced that he knew there were children in the house. We tell them nothing, Mara said. Sam and Nell, not one word of any of this. Children can feel fear in a house even when they can't name it. If we're afraid, they'll be afraid, so we won't be afraid. Not where they can see. Elias looked at her a long moment. You've done this before. Kept a brave face over a bad thing. My father died owing money he'd borrowed to keep his school open, Mara said. I was 19. I smiled at the men who came to take our furniture, and I served them tea while they carried out my mother's piano, because if I hadn't smiled, I'd have screamed and screaming never carried a single note back through the door. She squared her shoulders. So yes, Mr. Boone, I have done this before. I'm good at it. And she turned and walked back toward the cabin, calling out to the twins that it was time for their letters, that she'd found paper and a bit of pencil, and any child worth his salt could learn to write his own name by supper. Elias watched her go. Then he looked at the ruined barn, and the empty corral, and the dry well, and up at the burning ridge, and he made a decision he did not tell her about. He was going to find out how Crowley was draining that spring, and he was going to do it that very night. The day did not let him. By noon, the heat had come down like a hammer, worse than the day before. The kind of dry, killing heat that made the pines creak and the horizon swim. What was left in the well would not fill a bucket. Elias hauled 2 buckets up the draw to the spring instead, the hidden spring, the deep one, and Mara went with him, because she would not stay behind, and because she wanted to see this water that a man would ruin a family to steal. The spring was set back in a cleft of rock, and it should have been running clear and cold and strong. It was not. It welled up thin and slow, and where the pool should have been deep, it was shallow. Its old water line marked plain as a scar on the rock a full foot above the water. 40 years, Elias said, staring at it. My daddy homesteaded this ground because of this spring. Ran clear through the drought of '64 when every other water in the valley failed. Ran clear the winter we near froze. It don't fail. He crouched at the edge and put his hand in the thin water. It's failing now. Mara walked the edge of the pool, slowly reading it the way she read everything. Water doesn't just leave Mr. Boone. It goes somewhere. If your spring's dropping and it's not the drought, then somebody's taking it before it reaches you, diverting it, higher up. She looked at the rock face above the spring, at the steep draw climbing up behind it. What's up there, above the spring? Nothing. Bare rock and scrub. Territory land not mine, not anybody's. Runs up to the ridge. He stood. Ain't nothing up there but... He stopped. But what? But the old prospect, he said slowly. There's an old mine at it up the draw. Silverman dug it back in the '60s, chasing a vein that petered out. He died broke. I bought some of his goods years back at the estate sale down in the settlement, a desk, some tools, a few odd papers I never looked close at. Nobody's been up to the diggings in 20 years. It's just a hole in the rock." His eyes sharpened. "But a hole in the rock dug into a mountain right above my spring is a place a man could break into an underground stream," Mara finished, "and turn it. Send your water somewhere it was never meant to go." She felt the cold logic click again, the whole shape of it coming clear. "He's not stealing your spring by drying it up, Mr. Boone. He's moving it. He's tapping the water underground before it reaches your land and running it down his own draw to his own ranch. And when your spring finally goes dry and you're starved off this mountain, he buys the abandoned land cheap, and by then the water's already been flowing to him for a year, and he owns it free and clear, and every rancher in 3 valleys has to come to him and pay whatever he asks for a drink." She turned to him. "That's the plan. That's the whole plan. It was never about cattle." Elias stared at her, and she watched the truth land in him like a blow. "I have to see that added," he said. "We have to see that added." "Ma'am?" 2 sets of eyes read a thing faster than one, Mara said. "And if there are papers up there or markings or survey stakes, you'll want somebody along who knows what she's looking at. You track, I'll read. That's the arrangement." She had already turned to climb. "Bring the rifle." They didn't reach it that day. They'd climbed no more than 20 minutes up the punishing draw when Sam's voice came thin and high from below, from the direction of the cabin, screaming, "Miss Mara! Miss Mara! Come quick! Nell fell in the well!" Mara was running before the last word landed. She half fell down the draw, her skirts tearing on the scrub, Elias's heavier boots pounding behind her, and the whole way down her heart hammered, one word, over and over, "Fell in the well, fell in the well, the dry well, the deep dry well," and she reached the yard, and there was Sam by the wellhead, sobbing, pointing down. She wanted to see the water. He wept. She leaned over to see, and she went in. Miss Mara. She went in. Elias hit the wellhead and looked down into the dark and roared his daughter's name. A small, terrified, live voice floated up. "Papa, she's alive." Elias sagged against the stone for 1 second, then he was all motion. "Nell, baby, don't you move, Papa's coming." He was already hauling on the well rope, but the crank was old, and the child was 15 feet down in the dark on a narrow ledge of collapsed stone, and the rope was frayed, and Mara saw him look at that frayed rope and do the math and reject it. "It won't hold your weight," she said. "I know it won't." "It'll hold mine." Elias turned. "I'm half your size, Mr. Boone." Mara was already knotting the rope around her waist, fast, her father's brother's sailor knots that she'd learned as a girl and never forgotten. "You lower me, I get to her, you haul us both. The rope holds 1 small woman and 1 small child. It does not hold a man built like a barn." She yanked the knot tight. "There's no time to argue, and you know it. Lower me down." For 1 terrible heartbeat he hesitated, a man who had already lost a wife to this mountain being asked to lower another woman into the dark on a frayed rope. Then Nell's voice came again, smaller. "Papa, it's dark. I don't like it." And Elias braced his boots against the wellhead and took the rope in both his enormous hands and said, "Go. I've got you. On my life, I've got you." Mara went over the edge into the dark. Down and down the stone, wet cold against her, the circle of daylight shrinking above her head, and she found the child crouched on a jut of broken rock, with the black water inches below. Her small feet wide-eyed, too frightened even to cry now. "There you are," Mara said, gentle as anything, like they'd only met over spilled milk. "There's my brave girl. Look at you, found a whole secret room down here." "I fell," Nell whispered. "You surely did. And now we're going to fly back up, you and me. Put your arms around my neck and hold on tight as you can, and don't you let go for anything, and I won't either. That's the whole trick of it. Neither of us lets go." Mara got 1 arm around the small body and gripped the rope with the other and called up into the light. I have her haul away. The rope went taut. It groaned. Somewhere above she heard the frayed strands begin to sing that thin, high sound that rope makes just before it goes. "Mr. Boone, the rope!" "I hear it." His voice came down strained with effort. "Hold on. Just hold on to her." They rose an inch. Another. The rope screamed. Nell's arms were a stranglehold around her neck, and Mara welcomed it, held the child so tight it must have hurt, and they rose foot by foot toward the light, while the rope came apart one strand at a time above their heads. "Almost," Elias grunted. "Almost." Her hand cleared the lip of the well. Elias let go the rope entirely and lunged and got both children both, because to him in that instant, Mara was as much his to save by the arms, by the collar, by whatever he could reach, and hauled them bodily over the edge and back and down into the dust, in a tangle, just as the rope up above on the crank finally parted with a crack like a shot. The severed end whipped down into the well and splashed in the dark far below. For a moment, nobody moved. Elias sat in the dirt with his back against the wellhead, and Nell clutched to his chest, and Sam thrown across his lap, and Mara half in his arms. All of them tangled, all of them breathing, all of them alive. Then Nell started to cry, great gulping sobs, and Sam started to cry, and Elias made a sound that was not quite a sob and not quite a laugh, and pressed his rough face into his daughter's dirty hair and held all three of them like a man holding the whole world. "You're all right," he kept saying. "You're all right. You're all right. I've got you. You're all right." And over the children's heads, his eyes found Mara's, and there were no words in either of them for what passed between them then, later, much later. After the children were calmed and fed and put down for a nap, they badly needed after Mara had bound the rope burn on her own palms without a word of complaint. Elias found her sitting on the porch step, and he sat down beside her, careful a respectful foot of space between them. "You went down a frayed rope into a dark hole for a child that ain't yours," he said. "One day. You've known her one day. She's a child in a hole," Mara said simply. "That's the whole of it. I didn't stop to check whose." Elias was quiet a while, then low. "Sarah, my wife, she'd have done the same. Exactly the same. Not a second's hesitation." His voice roughened. "I spent 2 years thinking there wasn't another soul on this earth built like that. And then a rich fool throws one off a train platform right in front of me." Mara looked down at her bandaged hands. "Don't make me into something I'm not, Mr. Boone. I came up this mountain because I had nowhere else to go. That's not courage. That's just having no other door. You could have taken his coins this morning and walked back to town, and been the woman who took his charity. No, I'd rather starve honest. That," Elias said, "is exactly what I mean." He stood before the moment could grow too large for either of them. "There's a spare rope in the barn the vandals missed. I'll rig the well again come morning. And Miss Mara." He paused, hat in hand. "Thank you. Ain't a word big enough, but it's the one I've got. Thank you." That night the fever started, not in the children in the mare. Elias's last remaining animal, an old broodmare too lame to have been worth stealing, left behind in the vandals' haste. Mara heard her thrashing in the barn, near midnight, went out with a lantern, and found the old horse down in her stall sides, heaving eyes rolling white foam at her muzzle. She woke Elias. He took one look, and his face fell. "Poisoned," he said. "Same as the trough was, I'd wager. Somebody got to her water, or the feed's fouled worse than we knew." He knelt by the mare's head. "She's the last horse I've got. She goes we're afoot for certain." Mara was already rolling up her sleeves. "My grandfather kept horses. I sat up with more sick animals than sick people growing up. Get me clean water, not from the well, from the good jug in the kitchen, and any oil you've got, and vinegar, if there's vinegar, and let's see if we can't pull her back." They worked over that old mare till dawn. Mara dozed her, and walked her when the horse could stand, and cooled her with the last of the good water when she couldn't. And Elias did everything Mara told him without question, this huge man taking orders from a woman he'd known 2 days, holding the mare's head, and murmuring to her in a low, steady voice while Mara worked. Twice, they thought they'd lost her. Twice, the old mare fought back. And as the sky began to gray, the mare heaved herself up onto all four legs, shook herself, and put her nose down into the clean water Mara offered, and drank like an ordinary thirsty horse. Elias let out a breath. "I'll be damned." "Language, Mr. Boone." But Mara was smiling, exhausted and filthy, and smiling. "You've a mare and 2 children who repeat everything." He laughed that rusty laugh again, less rusty now than it had been 2 days before. And then he looked at her across the back of the horse they'd saved together, and the laugh faded into something quieter and more dangerous. And Mara felt her own breath catch, and she was suddenly very aware of the dawn light and the smell of hay, and the fact that they were alone and had been for hours. She looked away first. "You should sleep," she said. "You've been up all night." "So have you. I'll sleep when the children wake and I've got them fed. Go on." But neither of them moved. "Miss Mara." Elias's voice had gone low and careful. "I need to say a thing, and I need you to hear it as the plain truth it is, and nothing more. When I asked you up this mountain, I told you I wasn't asking for a wife. I meant it. I still mean it. I'll not go back on my word, nor crowd you, nor make this place anything but safe for you." He turned his hat in his hands. "But I'd be a liar if I said I didn't feel the ground shifting under me. 2 days, and I already can't picture this place without you in it. That ain't a proposal. That's just a man being honest with a woman who's earned honesty. That's all it is." Mara's heart was doing something complicated and unwelcome in her chest. "That's a great deal of honesty for a man who claims he doesn't talk much," she managed. "Reckon you're a bad influence." And she laughed, and he laughed, and for one moment, the whole terrible weight of the poisoned barn and the drying spring and the threatening note lifted, and they were just 2 people who'd saved a horse together and found against all sense that they liked each other very much. The moment ended when Sam came running from the cabin. "Papa! Papa, there's a man! A man on a horse coming up the road." Elias moved like water. He had Mara behind him and the barn between them and the road before she'd fully turned, and he was reaching for the rifle he'd propped in the corner. "How many, Sam?" "Just one, Papa. He's got a black coat. And papers. He's waving papers." Elias and Mara looked at each other. "Crowley doesn't ride up alone waving papers," Mara said slowly. "Crowley sends men in the dark. This is someone else." The rider crested the last rise and came down toward the cabin at an easy walk. A thin man in a black coat, hatless in the heat, sweating, and he raised one hand in a gesture that was almost apologetic and called out in a reedy town voice, "Boone, Elias Boone! Don't shoot, for God's sake. I'm just the clerk. Deacon Pyle from the land office in Gospel Creek. I've got papers you need to see. I've got—" The man reined up a good distance off out of easy rifle range, and his voice cracked. "Boone, I shouldn't be here. If Crowley knew I rode up here, he'd have me killed. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't file it and say nothing. Not with children up here." Elias didn't lower the rifle. "File what?" The clerk fumbled a folded document from his coat and held it up in a shaking hand. "A claim," he called. "Silas Crowley filed a water rights claim yesterday afternoon, on the spring that feeds your land. He's claiming the source lies on territory ground above your property line, and that he's been diverting and using that water for over a year, which by the law makes the right his not yours established use." The clerk's voice dropped, but the still morning air carried it clear. "He's got survey papers to prove the line runs where he says, papers with the territorial surveyor's own seal. And Boone, the hearing's set for 6 days from now. 6 days, and then that water's legally his, and there's not a thing you can do about it because you've got no papers of your own to say different." The document trembled in the clerk's hand. Mara stepped out from behind Elias before he could stop her. "Mr. Pyle," she said, and her voice was steady and clear, and carried the ring of a woman who had once served tea to men carrying out her mother's piano. "You said survey papers, with the surveyor's seal. Have you seen them yourself? Held them in your own hands?" The clerk blinked at her, This dust-streaked woman who spoke like a schoolmarm. Yes, I filed them, yesterday. And the date on the survey. The date the line was supposedly drawn. Do you recall it? It was, the clerk frowned, thinking, 18 and 81, 2 years back. That's how he claims a year's established use, you see. The survey predates 1881. Mara went very still, and Elias saw the cold light come up in her eyes. The reader's light, the light that had made a rich man afraid on a train platform. Mr. Pyle, who was the territorial surveyor in 1881? Well, that'd be old Harlan Voss, but the clerk stopped. He died, winter of 80, froze in a blizzard out past the divide. Everybody knows that. The post sat empty near a year before they sent a new man out. The silence on that mountaintop was absolute. Then it isn't possible, Mara said softly, for Harlan Voss to have surveyed and sealed that line in 1881, because Harlan Voss was already a year dead. She turned to look at Elias, and her voice, when it came, was quiet as the grave and hard as the rock beneath their feet. The papers are forged, Mr. Boone. Crowley's whole claim rests on a survey signed by a dead man, and if we can prove that if we can put our hands on the original survey with the true date, or find one honest witness who knows that seal is stolen, then Silas Crowley doesn't just lose the water. She folded her bandaged hands. He hangs for forgery and fraud, and every crime he's committed to cover it, the horses, the poison, the threat against these children, all of it comes down on his head at once. The clerk went white. You can't prove forgery in 6 days. He's got the only copy of that survey locked in his own house. There's no other. There is one other place it could be, Elias said slowly, and Mara turned to him, and he was staring up the draw, up toward the bare rock and the scrub and the old silver mine that no one had entered in 20 years. The prospector, the one who dug the adit right above my spring. He'd have surveyed his own claim before he filed it. Every prospector does to mark his diggings. And I bought his desk, his tools, a box of papers I never once looked through. His jaw set. There's an old survey of this ground somewhere. Maybe in that adit. Maybe in that box in my own cabin. A true one. One with the true line and the true date drawn by an honest man 20 years before Crowley ever dreamed of stealing this water. He lowered the rifle at last. Mr. Pyle, you rode up here at the risk of your life to warn a stranger. I won't forget it, and neither will these children. Now I need one more thing from you. He walked toward the clerk, and Mara watched a plan settle over him like a coat. I need you to ride back down and file that claim exactly as Crowley told you to. Say nothing. Act the frightened clerk you are. Give me 6 days and don't let him suspect you warned us. The clerk swallowed. And what'll you do in 6 days? Elias looked back over his shoulder at the cabin where his children were, at the ruined barn at the dying spring, and last of all, at the woman a rich man had thrown into the dust, who had come up his mountain with one suitcase, and turned out to be the one weapon Silas Crowley never saw coming. In 6 days, Elias Boone said, I'm going to find that survey and bring the truth down off this mountain and lay it on the table in front of the whole town that laughed at her. Down in the yard, the old mare they'd saved lifted her head and whinnied at the rising sun, and far up the draw, the thin cold spring ran on dying by inches, keeping its buried secret for 6 more days. The clerk was barely off the mountain before Elias hauled the dead prospector's box out from under the eaves where it had sat forgotten for 6 years. He dropped it on the table, and Mara went at it the way a starving woman goes at bread. Papers, receipts, an old assay report, a Bible with a broken spine, a bundle of letters tied in string, gone brittle with age. She sorted it all with quick, sure hands, while Elias watched holding his breath, and Sam and Nell peered over the table edge, asking what they were looking for. Treasure. Mara told them, not looking up. A piece of paper worth more than gold. Now hush and let me hunt. But the survey was not there. She went through every sheet twice. Assay reports, a claim registration letters from a sister back in Ohio, a bill of sale for a mule. No survey. No map of the diggings. Nothing with a line and a date. It's not here, she said finally, and the disappointment in the room was a physical thing. He filed a claim. Here's the registration, so he must have surveyed, but the survey itself isn't in this box. She set the papers down. He kept it somewhere else, somewhere he thought safer. Elias's eyes went to the drawer. The adit. The adit? Mara agreed. They went at first light the next morning, the two of them leaving the children with strict instruction, and the door bolted and the old mare's bell rigged to ring if anyone came up the road. Elias carried the rifle and a coil of the new rope and a lantern. Mara carried nothing but her wits, which she had come to understand were the only weapon on that mountain Crowley truly feared. The climb near killed them both in the heat. But they reached the adit by mid-morning, a black mouth in the rock, timbered at the entrance, half-choked with fallen scree, and Elias lit the lantern and went in first, bent double under the low ceiling, and Mara came behind with her hand fisted in the back of his shirt, so as not to lose him in the dark. 20 feet in the tunnel opened, and there, exactly as Mara had reasoned it would be, was the water. An underground stream ran through a natural channel in the rock, the true source, the spring's own heart, before it ever reached the surface. And someone had been at it. Recently. Fresh timber shored a crude dam, and a channel had been cut into the rock to turn the water aside, sending better than half the flow down a new blasted course that ran off into the dark toward the south. Toward Crowley's land. There it is, Elias breathed, lifting the lantern. There's my spring. He's been up here with powder and men right over my head, stealing it a bucket at a time. His voice shook with a fury she'd not heard from him before. Right over my sleeping children's heads. Elias. Mara had gone still beside the diverted channel. Look. Someone had left tools. A pick, a shovel, a coil of fuse, and tucked into a dry niche in the rock, where a man might store his dinner, a flat tin document case. Elias pried it open. Inside were papers, and the top one was a survey, and it bore a seal, and Mara took it to the lantern with hands that would not stay steady. She read it. She read it again. Then she made a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob. It's the forgery, she whispered. The working copy. Elias, look at the seal. It's Harlan Voss's seal, pressed fresh, but the paper, she held it to the light. The paper's new. Not 2 years old. New this season. You can smell the ink. And here in the corner. Her finger stabbed at a faint pencil mark someone had failed to erase. Here's the true survey line drawn in pencil first before they inked the false one over it. Someone traced an honest survey and moved the boundary. And they were sloppy. They left the pencil. She looked up, her whole face alight. This isn't just proof the papers are forged. This is the forgery itself, with the honest line still showing underneath. This is the noose, Elias. This is the whole rope. Elias stared at the paper in her hands as though it were made of light. Then we've got him, he said. We've got him. And that was the moment the shooting started. The first bullet struck the rock above Elias's head and screamed off into the dark. He had Mara down and behind him before the echo died, the lantern knocked flat, the flame guttering. They followed us, he said against her ear. Or they were coming up to work the dam and found us here. He got the lantern up, snuffed it to a low glow. Miss Mara, listen to me. There's 2 ways out of a mine and only one that a man expects. Now I want you to... How many? Sounded like 2 rifles, maybe 3. He pressed the tin case into her hands. You take this. You keep it against your body no matter what. If it comes to it, you crawl into the dark deep and you wait, and you do not come out for anything. You hear me? Not for anything. Not for you. Not for me, for the children. That paper gets down this mountain even if we don't. His hand found her face in the dark, just for a second, rough and gentle at once. You understand. She understood. She hated it. She understood. There's a shaft branches off yonder, Elias whispered. Old ventilation cut. Comes out on the far side of the ridge 100 yards off in the scrub. They won't know it's there. You take the paper, and you go out that way while I keep 'em looking at this door. Then I lose 'em in the rocks and we meet back at the cabin. That's not a plan, that's you dying so I can run. It's the plan we've got. No. Mara gripped his arm. Listen to me. They want us stranded. Remember? They want us gone quiet. Crowley doesn't want two bodies in a mine that brings the law up here asking questions. If they meant to kill us outright, they'd have rushed us. That first shot was a warning shot. It went high on purpose. They're trying to pin us here, keep us bottled till Crowley decides what to do with us. Which means they're waiting. Which means... Her mind raced. Which means they don't expect us to come out shooting. They expect us to be afraid. Elias was quiet a beat. You read that in the dark off one bullet. I read it off everything he's done for 2 weeks. He's a patient man who never once has come at you straight. His men are the same. They'll be dug and comfortable waiting us out. She pressed the tin case flat against her chest and drew a breath. So we don't wait. We come out where they don't expect from the direction they don't expect, and we make more noise and more trouble than two people ever should. You said the ventilation shaft comes out behind them, 100 yards behind on the far slope. Then that's not my escape route, Mr. Boone. Her eyes had adjusted enough now to find his in the dark. That's our attack. She would remember all her life the moment Elias Boone realized the woman he'd pulled out of the dust was going to help him fight. They went out the ventilation shaft together. It was a filthy crawl, 100 feet of stooped agony through cold stone. And they came out in the scrub on the far slope, filthy and scraped and squinting in the light, and exactly as she'd said above and behind the two men who crouched behind boulders, watching the main adit rifles trained on a door their quarry had already left. Elias didn't hesitate. He put a bullet into the rock a foot from the nearer man's head and roared, and the two hired men who had every reason to believe their targets were pinned helpless in the mine before them came near out of their skins when fire came down on them from the wrong direction entirely. One broke and ran for his horse. Elias let him go. The other spun panicked and fired wild, and Elias fired back, and the man's rifle went spinning out of his hands, and then Elias was down the slope on him like an avalanche, and it was over in a matter of seconds. The huge mountain man had the hired gun face down in the dirt, with a knee in his back, before the fellow understood he'd lost. Mara rope. She was already there with it. They bound him hand and foot, and Elias hauled him up to sitting against a boulder, and Mara crouched down in front of him with the tin document case held where he could see it, and she looked into the man's frightened face and read it the way she read everything. You're not from here, she said. Your boots are town boots, not range boots. Your hands are soft. You're hired muscle brought in from somewhere else, and I'd guess you don't know 1/10 of what you've been made part of. She let that sit. Do you know what's in this case? The man said nothing. It's a forged survey, signed with a dead man's seal. Do you know what they hang men for in this territory? She tilted her head. Forgery of a government document is one. Fraud is another. And conspiracy, that's the one that catches all the little fish along with the big one. Every man who fired a shot up here today is part of a conspiracy to defraud, and when this case reaches the circuit judge, the big fish is going to give up every little fish he can to save his own neck. That's what rich men do. They spend the men who worked for them like they spend everything else. She leaned in. So here's the only question that matters for you. Do you want to be a man who confessed and helped, or a man Crowley hangs alongside himself to look cooperative? The hired man's throat worked. He was young, she saw. Younger than Elias, scared under the hardness. I never signed nothing, he said. I just did what the foreman said. Cut a fence. Move some water. Scare off a squatter. His eyes flicked to Elias. Wasn't told about no children up here. I swear it. When Dobbs put that note about the children on your barn post, I told him it weren't right. I got a little girl my own self back home. His name's Dobbs, Mara said quietly, filing it. Crowley's man. The one who was with him at the station. Dobbs runs it all. The man said the words coming faster now, the way they do once the dam breaks. Crowley never dirties his hands. It all goes through Dobbs. The water, the survey, the men Dobbs hired the fellow forged the papers some drunk down in Cheyenne used to work the surveyor's office. Dobbs paid him $50 and a bottle. I heard him brag on it. He swallowed. You want to hang Crowley, you got to catch Dobbs first, and Dobbs don't never leave anything writ down. Mara and Elias exchanged a look.
He left something writ down,
Mara said softly, tapping the tin case. He left this. The man they'd captured had a name Ellis Ward, no relation to anything but his own bad luck. And by the time they'd walked him back down the mountain, prodded along at the point of his own confiscated rifle, he'd told them the shape of the whole thing. The hearing was in 5 days. Crowley meant to win it clean on the forged survey, and had only sent men up to work the dam, and finding intruders to bottle them. He had not authorized killing. Dobbs Ward believed had wanted to. Crowley had said no, not because he had a conscience, but because a dead rancher and a dead woman brought a circuit judge and a coroner up the mountain, and the last thing Crowley wanted was official eyes on that adit before the water rights were safely his. So we've got 5 days. Elias said that night, low after the children slept, and the one thing he can't afford is attention, which means the smartest thing we can do is make as much noise as humanly possible, Mara finished. Get the truth in front of as many eyes as we can as fast as we can, before he can arrange a quiet accident to make it all disappear. She had the forged survey spread on the table under the lamp, and beside it a sheet of her own on which she'd been writing in her clear schoolteacher's hand everything Ward had confessed. He spent 2 years being patient in the dark, Elias, so we do the opposite. We drag it all into the light, and we do it loud. Elias looked at her across the lamplight, filthy still a scrape across her cheek. Her hands wrapped and her hair come down 5 days from a hearing that would decide everything, and he thought she had never in her life looked less like a decoration and more like the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. He did not say it, but she read it in his face anyway, because she read everything, and this time she did not look away. The reckoning came sooner than 5 days. It came the next night, and it came the way Crowley always came in the dark from a direction they didn't expect. Mara woke to the smell of smoke. She was up and out of her room and into the main room before she was fully awake, and she saw the orange light dancing on the walls through the window, and she knew before she looked that it was the barn. Elias! The barn's afire. He was up and moving. But it wasn't only the barn. They'd set the barn to draw him out. And it worked. Elias was through the door and running toward the flames, the last mare screaming inside, before Mara's shout of warning caught in her throat, because she'd seen in the leaping firelight the shapes of men who were not running toward the fire at all. They were running toward the cabin, toward the children. Everything after happened very fast and very slow at once. Mara did not scream again. Screaming her father had taught her never carried a single note back through a door. She turned and ran for the wall above the door and took down the rifle, and she had it loaded 3 rounds the way Elias had taught her that first morning a lifetime ago. And she put her body squarely between the door and the room where Sam and Nell slept, and when the first man kicked the door in, she was ready. "That's far enough," she said. The man froze. He had not expected the woman. He'd expected a dark cabin and 2 sleeping children and an easy grab. Dobbs's real plan laid bare. In that instant, the barn, a diversion. The children, the true target hostages to drive Boone off his land in an hour without a single shot fired at a grown man. Easy, lady. The man showed his empty hands, but his eyes went to the rifle measuring. "We ain't here to hurt nobody. Mr. Dobbs just wants a word with the little ones. Insurance is all. Put the gun down and don't nobody get—" "You take 1 step toward that room," Mara said, and her voice did not shake. "Not this time, not with 2 children behind her. And I will put a bullet through you, and then I will reload because my grandfather taught me to reload faster than most men can rush a doorway, and I will put the second one through your friend. I have thrown a rich man's money back in his teeth on a public platform. I have gone down a dry well on a frayed rope. I have crawled through a mountain in the dark with a forged deed against my heart. Do you honestly believe, sir, that you are the most frightening thing I have faced this week?" The man hesitated. That hesitation was Dobbs's whole scheme failing. Because behind the intruders, silhouetted against his own burning barn, having gotten the screaming mare loose and turned at last to see the men swarming his home, came Elias Boone, and there was nothing patient or quiet or careful in him now at all. He came through the yard like the wrath of God. The man in the doorway heard him too late. Elias hit the little knot of intruders from behind, and they scattered like quail, and it was chaos and shouting and fists in the firelight. And one man raised a pistol, and Mara in the doorway sighted down the rifle her grandfather taught her to load and fired over Elias's shoulder, and knocked the pistol spinning from the man's hand, and Elias put that man down with one blow and turned for the next. It was over in 90 seconds. 2 of Dobbs' men ran for the horses and got away into the dark. One lay groaning in the dust, and Dobbs himself. Mara knew him the moment the firelight caught his face, the tall man from the station, the man who'd stood behind Crowley like a fence post. Dobbs stood at the edge of the yard, and he had not run, and he was smiling, and he had a pistol, and it was pointed not at Elias. It was pointed at the doorway, at Mara, at the children behind her. "Now everybody just hold still," Dobbs called out, easy as anything. "Boone, you move, and I put one through your lady friend, and then through whichever little Boone is standing closest behind her. You understand me?" Elias went still, 20 feet away, chest-heaving, fists bloody. He went absolutely still, because Dobbs had found the one thing on this earth that could stop him. "There now," Dobbs said. "That's better." He kept the pistol level on Mara and did not so much as glance at Elias. "Miss Whitfield, is it? I remember you. The scullery girl from the platform. Mr. Crowley was right about you. You've been nothing but trouble since you stepped off that train. Now, I understand you folks went up to the diggings today. I understand you took something out of there that don't belong to you. And I understand," his smile widened, "that a smart woman like you knows exactly how this goes. You bring me that tin case right now, nice and slow, and maybe these children see morning." Mara did not lower the rifle, but she could not fire. He knew it, and she knew it. Her 3 rounds were spent to 2, and if she moved, he'd fire, and even if she got him, he might get her, and behind her in the dark were Sam and Nell awake. Now she could hear them, Nell's small, terrified breathing. The whole world balanced on the point of Dobbs' pistol. "The case," Dobbs said. "Now." And Mara Whitfield, who read faces the way other people read the weather, looked at Dobbs' face across the fire-lit yard, and she saw the flaw in it, the one thing his kind never accounted for, and she made the most dangerous wager of her life. "You won't shoot," she said. Dobbs' smile flickered. "Try me. You won't shoot, and I'll tell you exactly why." She kept her voice level and clear, the schoolteacher's voice, the tea-serving voice, the voice that had never once carried her fear back through a door. "Because Silas Crowley told you no bodies, didn't he? A dead rancher, a dead woman, dead children on this mountain that brings a circuit judge and a coroner and federal marshals up that road, and the very first thing they'd do is search that mine, and the second thing they'd do is find your dam and your diverted water and every bit of the crime you've spent 2 years hiding. Crowley would rather lose the water than hang. And you, Mr. Dobbs, you're smart enough to know he'd hand you to the judge in a heartbeat to save his own neck. So no, you won't shoot, because a dead body up here is the one thing your whole scheme cannot survive." She took one step forward, the rifle steady into the muzzle of his gun. "You've got a pistol pointed at me, and it's empty of everything but bluff, and we both know it." The yard held its breath. Dobbs' face worked. She watched the calculation run behind his eyes, watched him weigh it, hate it, and find it true. His thumb was on the hammer. She saw it. For one endless second, she truly did not know if she had read him right or read him into her own grave. Then behind Dobbs, a small, hard voice said, "You leave my papa alone." And Sam, who had slipped out the back window while every eye was on the standoff, who had crept around the burning barn on his own 5-year-old bravery, Sam swung the heavy iron skillet from the porch with both hands, and everything he had straight into the back of Dobbs' knee. Dobbs buckled. The pistol went off into the dirt, and Elias Boone crossed 20 feet of fire-lit yard in the time it takes a heart to beat once, and Dobbs never got up again. Later, they would bind Dobbs and Ward and the groaning third man together, and Elias would stand guard over them while Mara held both trembling children in her lap by the dying light of the burned barn, and Sam would not stop shaking, and Nell would not stop crying, and Mara would rock them both and murmur the low tune her mother once hummed over and over until the shaking eased. "You could have been killed," Elias said, hoarse, kneeling beside them, one arm around all three. "You stood in a doorway and dared a man to shoot you. You bet your life on reading his face." "I bet it on Crowley being a coward," Mara said, exhausted, "and on you being close." She looked down at Sam, at the boy who'd swung a skillet at a killer. "And I bet it apparently on the bravest 5-year-old in the Wyoming Territory." Sam hiccuped against her shoulder. "I hit him real hard." "You hit him," Mara said, and pressed her lips to his hair, harder than any grown man could have. "And you're never ever to do anything so brave and so foolish again, do you hear me? My heart cannot take it." Elias looked at the three of them, his son, his daughter, and the woman. A rich man had thrown into the dust all of them alive, all of them his, whatever the word for it was. And then he looked out at the bound men, and the burned barn, and the tin case sitting safe on the table through the window, the forgery and the noose, and the whole truth of it waiting for daylight. 4 days to the hearing, he said quietly. We've got the paper. We've got Ward's confession. We've got Dobbs himself caught red-handed with a pistol on children. That's enough to bring the law up here, not send us begging down to it. He stood, and there was something new and settled in him, a man who had stopped being patient. At dawn I ride for the county seat. Not Gospel Creek. Crowley owns Gospel Creek, the county seat where the circuit judge sits. And I bring back a real marshal, and I bring him up this mountain to see that dam with his own eyes. You're not riding anywhere alone, Mara said. Somebody's got to stay with the children and guard 3 prisoners. Then we send Ward. Mara looked at the young hired man, bound and miserable against the wall, the one with a little girl of his own back home. He wants to turn. Give him the chance to ride down and bring the marshal himself with a note in my hand, laying out everything, and let his cooperation start now. A guilty man racing to confess before his boss can silence him. No marshal in the territory ignores that. Elias considered it. Then he almost smiled. You'd trust a man who cut my fence to ride for the law. I'd trust a frightened father to save his own neck, Mara said. It's the most reliable force I know of, present company excepted. And in the gray before dawn, they cut Ellis Ward's legs loose, but not his hands, and they sat him on the old mare with the note pinned inside his shirt, and a promise that his cooperation would be told true to the judge. And they sent him down the mountain toward the county seat and the law. A hired villain turned witness, carrying the first thread of Silas Crowley's undoing down into the burning summer valley. Mara watched him go until the dust swallowed him. He'll run, Elias said beside her. 10 to 1 he runs the other way the second he's out of sight. He won't, Mara said. She was watching the road and the risen sun and the long dry miles between this mountain and justice. He's got a little girl. A man with a little girl always rides toward the thing that lets him look her in the eye again. She turned back toward the cabin, toward the children stirring inside, toward the tin case that held a dead surveyor's stolen seal and a corrupt man's whole hanging future. 4 days, Elias. 4 days, and the truth comes down off this mountain, whether Crowley wants it to or not. Behind them, the ruined barn still smoked against the morning, and the last mare-cropped grass in the yard, and somewhere far below, a young man with a guilty heart and a daughter's face in his mind rode hard toward the law with the first true word anyone had ever carried against Silas Crowley. Ward did not run the other way. He rode 2 days and part of a night, and on the second afternoon he came back up the mountain with his hands free and a federal marshal beside him, a lean, gray, unhurried man named Coy Prentice, who had ridden circuit in 3 territories and had a way of looking at a thing until it confessed. Mara saw them first from the porch, and her heart near stopped until she counted the badge on the second rider's coat. He came back, she said. Elias, he came back and he brought the law. Ward slid off the mare, looking 10 years older than when he'd left. Told you I'd do it, he said, not quite meeting anyone's eye. Marshall wanted to hear it from me the whole ride. I told him all of it. Every bit. He swallowed. Reckon I'll hang some for my part. But I told him true. Marshall Prentice stepped down slow, took the measure of the burned barn, the bound men Elias brought out from the shed, the 2 children peering from the doorway, and last of all the woman on the porch, with a scrape on her cheek and a rifle within reach. "You'd be Miss Whitfield," he said. "The one wrote the note." "I am." Longest, clearest, best reasoned statement of a crime I've read in 20 years on the bench roads. He tapped his coat pocket where the note lived. "Read it 4 times. You a lawyer, ma'am?" "A schoolteacher's daughter, Marshall." "Well?" Prentice looked at her a long, assessing moment. "The schoolteachers I knew never laid out a fraud conspiracy tight enough to hang a man on. Show me this mine." He believed the paper. But Prentice was not a man to hang the richest citizen in the territory on a paper alone, and so before he would say one word about arrests, he made Elias take him up the punishing draw to the adit itself, and he went in with the lantern, and he came out an hour later with dust on his good coat and a hard, flat look in his eye. "There's a dam in that mountain," he said, "diverting a natural spring off one man's patented land and onto another's, and it's been built inside the last season by the look of the timber. That's not drought, Boone. That's a crime you can walk into and touch." He turned to Mara. "And your dead surveyor, Harlan Voss." I knew Voss. Rode with him one summer. He did freeze out past the Divide winter of '80. I helped carry what the wolves left of him. His jaw tightened. "Any man used Harlan's seal to steal water 2 years after I buried him is going to answer to me personal." That was the moment Mara knew they'd won. Not the paper, not the dam. This a lawman with a dead friend's name to avenge standing on their mountain angry. "There's a hearing in Gospel Creek," she said, "day after tomorrow. Crowley means to make the theft legal in front of a judge who doesn't know the survey's forged." "Is there now?" Prentice almost smiled, and it was not a pleasant thing to see. "Then I reckon I'll attend." They came down off the mountain the next morning in a strange procession. Elias and Mara on the old mare and a horse. The marshal had brought the children riding double before them, the marshal ahead and behind, roped together, and sullen Dobbs and the 2 hired men prisoners bound for the county jail. Ward rode free, but close, a witness now, not a captive. Gospel Creek saw them coming a long way off. By the time they reached the main street, the word had run ahead of them, and the town that had watched Mara Whitfield humiliated on a train platform 2 weeks before now lined the boardwalks to watch her ride back in with a federal marshal at her side and the man who'd shamed her about to be brought low. She sat straight in the saddle and looked at none of them. But she felt their eyes, and she remembered every face that had laughed. They put the prisoners in the jail. The Gospel Creek sheriff, a soft, heavy man named Tull, went pale as milk when the marshal walked Dobbs through his door, and Mara marked that too. Filed it the sheriff's fear, and then there was nothing to do but wait for the hearing in the morning, and Elias found them 2 rooms at the boarding house and paid for them, and Mara did not miss the significance of a poor man spending hard coin, so that she and the children need not sleep rough in the town that had scorned her. That night Crowley made his last move. He did not come himself. Men like Crowley never came themselves. He sent a lawyer, a smooth, soft-handed man named Ambrose, who knocked at the boarding house door after dark and asked to speak with Mr. Boone and the lady privately on a matter of business. Elias would have shut the door in his face. Mara let him in. "Say it," she said. "Whatever he sent you to say." Ambrose smiled the smile of a man who had bought and sold people his whole life. "Mr. Crowley wishes to express his regret at the recent unpleasantness. He's a reasonable man. He'd like to make things right." He set a leather folio on the table and opened it, and inside was money. More money than Elias Boone had seen in his life, more than the ranch was worth 3 times over. "He'll purchase the mountain property at this figure. Generous, you'll agree. In exchange, the water dispute is settled quietly between gentlemen. The misunderstanding at the mine is forgotten. The charges against his employees are dropped, and you take your family and this handsome sum and start fresh somewhere with better prospects. Everyone walks away whole. He folded his hands. Everyone walks away rich in your case, Mr. Boone. Think of your children's future. The word children was a mistake, and Mara watched Elias's face go dangerous, and she put her hand lightly on his arm before he could speak, and she answered instead. He's frightened, she said. Ambrose blinked. I beg your pardon. Silas Crowley is terrified. Mara looked at the money without touching it, without so much as leaning toward it. This isn't a generous man making things right. This is a drowning man throwing his purse at the shore. He knows we have the forged survey. He knows the marshal has seen the dam. He knows Ward has turned and Dobbs is caught, and he knows that in a courtroom tomorrow all of it comes out. And so tonight he's trying to buy the one thing money can still buy. Silence. She raised her eyes to the lawyers. You may tell Mr. Crowley that the woman he threw into the dust said this: there is not enough money in the Wyoming Territory to purchase my silence, because I have already learned exactly what my silence is worth to him, and I would rather have the truth than the price of it. Ambrose's smile faded. You're making a serious mistake. Mr. Crowley has friends. Judges are persuadable. A forged document can become a clerical error. A dam can become an old prospector's work. You have no idea the resources arrayed against you. We have a federal marshal who buried Harlan Voss with his own hands, Elias said low. You go tell Crowley that. See how persuadable he finds him. He picked up the folio, closed it, and held it out. Take his money and get out of my sight. And Ambrose, the lawyer paused at the door, you tell him one more thing. You tell him my son is 5 years old and he swung an iron skillet at the knees of a grown man holding a gun on him because that man threatened his sisters. You tell Silas Crowley that. And then you ask him whether he really wants to stand across a courtroom from the people who raised that boy. The lawyer left without another word. He'll try something else, Mara said when the door had closed. Cornered men always do. The money was the easy offer. When that fails, he'll try to make the paper disappear. Elias finished. Or us. Mara looked at the tin case which had not left her side in 3 days, which sat now on the table between them. Then it doesn't spend tonight in this room. If Crowley's got friends in this town, this boarding house isn't safe. The jail isn't safe that Sheriff went white as a sheet. Then where? Mara thought. Then slowly she smiled. With the one person in Gospel Creek that Crowley would never think to search. The one person too frightened of everyone to be anyone's ally, and so trusted by no one and suspected by no one. She stood. Deacon Pyle, the clerk, the man who risked his life to warn a stranger. Crowley thinks Pyle is his creature. He'd never dream the man's already turned. And in the dark, Mara Whitfield walked alone to the land office and put the tin case into the trembling hands of the clerk who had started all of this, and Deacon Pyle held it against his thin chest like the most precious thing in the world. If I keep this, Pyle whispered, and he finds out, then you'll have done one brave thing in your life, Mr. Pyle, Mara said gently, and it will have been the thing that mattered. You started this when you rode up my mountain. Finish it. Bring this to the courthouse tomorrow in your own hands when the marshal calls for it, not before. Can you do that? The clerk looked down at the case. His hands shook, but he nodded. For the children, he said. I kept thinking about the children the whole time. I've got none of my own. But a man ought to be able to say he stood up once. He straightened his narrow shoulders. I'll bring it. I swear before God I'll bring it. The courthouse was packed to the walls the next morning. The whole territory had heard. Ranchers who'd lost stock to the drought townsfolk, who'd smelled a scandal, the curious and the cruel, and the merely hungry for a show. They filled every bench and lined every wall. And among them sat Silas Crowley, in a fine suit, calm as a Sunday morning. Because Silas Crowley did not yet know that his lawyer's money had been refused, or that the survey he thought locked in his own house had a twin, or that the clerk he trusted sat in the back with a tin case under his coat. The circuit judge was an old man named Harmon, dry and impatient and honest, which Crowley had counted on being able to fool. Crowley's lawyer opened smooth as silk. He laid out the water rights claim. He produced the forged survey with Voss's seal. He argued established use prior right, the letter of the territorial law. He painted Elias Boone as a squatter clinging to land whose water rightfully flowed to Mr. Crowley's improvements. And he painted Mara. She felt the whole room turned to look as a woman of no standing, jilted and bitter, who had attached herself to Boone out of spite. And who, Ambrose finished, does the defendant offer to contest a survey bearing the seal of the territorial surveyor himself, a mountain horsebreaker, and a woman off a train with no husband, no property, and no reason to be believed? He sat. Judge Harmon looked over his spectacles at Elias. "You've got counsel, Mr. Boone." "No, sir." "You've got anything at all to say against a sealed government survey?" And Elias Boone stood up, hat in his two hands, in a courtroom full of people who'd laughed at the woman he'd brought down off his mountain, and he said, "No, sir, I'm just a horsebreaker. I don't know the law and I can't argue a paper." He turned. "But she can. And I'd ask the court to hear her on account of she's the smartest person in this room and the bravest, and everything true that's about to be said, she's the one who found it out." The room murmured. Ambrose was on his feet, objecting that the woman had no standing, and Judge Harmon banged his gavel, and into that noise, a dry, unhurried voice spoke from the back of the room. "She's got standing with me, Judge." And Marshal Coy Prentice walked up the center aisle, and the courtroom went dead silent, and Crowley's calm cracked for the first time. "Federal Marshal, Your Honor," Prentice said, showing the badge. "I've spent 3 days on this matter, and I'd take it as a personal favor if the court let the lady speak. She's going to say some things, and then I'm going to prove every one of them true." Judge Harmon looked from the marshal to the lawyer to the woman rising slowly from the bench, and he was an honest man, and honest men know the smell of a thing gone wrong. "The court will hear Miss Whitfield," he said. Mara stood. She did not raise her voice. She had learned long ago that a raised voice never carried a single note through a closed door, and that the truth spoken quietly makes a room lean in to hear it. "The survey Mr. Crowley has entered into evidence," she said, "bears the seal of Harlan Voss, territorial surveyor, and is dated the year 1881. She let it sit. Harlan Voss froze to death out past the divide in the winter of 1880. He was dead a full year before he supposedly drew this line. She turned slow to the marshal. Marshal Prentice helped bury him. Perhaps he'd tell the court whether a dead man can hold a surveyor's chain. Prentice's voice was flat as a gravestone. "He cannot, Your Honor. I put Harlan Voss in the ground myself. This survey is a forgery, and I'll swear to the date of his death on any Bible you hand me." The courtroom erupted. Crowley was on his feet, his lawyer pulling at his sleeve, and Judge Harmon hammered the gavel and shouted for order. And when it came, Mara spoke again into the ringing quiet. "There is more, Your Honor. This forged survey is not the only copy." The whole room held its breath. "There exists a working copy, the one the forger himself used, and on it, beneath the false line inked in with a dead man's seal, the true survey line still shows in pencil, where the forger traced the honest boundary before he moved it. That copy also shows fresh ink and new paper not 2 years old. It is in itself the entire proof of the crime." She turned toward the back of the room, and her voice rang out clear. "Mr. Pyle, if you would." Every head turned. And Deacon Pyle. Thin, trembling, terrified the clerk who had spent his whole life being no one's ally and everyone's tool. Deacon Pyle stood up in the back of the Gospel Creek Courthouse, and he walked up that long aisle past Silas Crowley on legs that shook with every step, and he laid the tin case in the marshal's hands, and then he turned and looked his employer full in the face for the first and last time in his life. "I rode up that mountain, Mr. Crowley," he said, and his reedy voice did not break. "I warned them. I hid the case. I did it because there were children up there, and you sent men to threaten children, and I could not be a part of it one more day." He drew a breath. "I've been afraid of you for 4 years. I'm not afraid of you anymore. There's nothing left you can take from me that's worth more than being able to say I did one right thing." The silence in the courtroom was the silence of a whole town watching the ground shift beneath a man they'd all bowed to. Marshall Prentice opened the case. He drew out the working survey. He held it to the tall window, and the whole front row could see it, the false line in ink, and beneath it faint but undeniable the honest line in pencil that no forger had ever managed to erase. Judge Harmon took it in his own hands and studied it a long, long time. "Mr. Crowley," he said at last very quietly, "your survey is a forgery, and I am inclined to believe it is the least of what you've done." It came apart fast after that, the way a rotten dam comes apart all at once the first crack runs. Prentice laid it out plain. The dam in the mountain built this season witnessed by a federal officer. Ward's confession given freely naming Dobbs as the man who hired a drunken forger in Cheyenne. Dobbs himself taken in the act of holding a pistol on children. The poisoned trough, the slashed feed, the threatening note in Crowley's man's own hand. Mara had kept it the note about the children, and it went into evidence too, and when it was read aloud, the whole courtroom made a sound like a growl. Crowley's lawyer tried. He objected, he argued, he called it circumstantial, he called Mara a schemer, and Ward a liar, and Pyle a disgruntled clerk. But the tide had turned, and every honest face in that room had turned with it, and when Ambrose demanded to know where was the proof that his client had ordered any of it, that it wasn't all the work of an overzealous foreman acting alone, it was the sheriff who broke. Tull, the soft, heavy sheriff who'd gone white as milk, stood up from the front bench where he'd been sweating through his collar for an hour, and he could not take it anymore. "He paid me," Tull blurted. "Crowley paid me to look the other way. $50 a month for 2 years to lose complaints, to not investigate the fence cutting, to sit on my hands. I got the ledger. I wrote it all down, every payment in case something like this." He was babbling now, a frightened man saving himself. "It's in my safe. Your Honor, I'll bring it, I'll bring all of it. Just let the record show. I told you I'm the one who told you." And Silas Crowley, who had bought a town, and a sheriff, and a dead man's seal, who had rejected a poor woman on a train platform because he wanted a wife. He could hang on a wall, sat down slowly in his fine suit, and put his face in his hands because he understood finally that it was over. Marshall Prentice walked over to him almost gently. "Silas Crowley," he said, "I'm arresting you for forgery of a government document, for fraud, for conspiracy, for the attempted diversion of water rights, and for so many things besides that. I'll need a fresh sheet of paper to list them. You'll answer for all of it before a federal court." He drew the cuffs. "And you'll answer to me for using Harlan Voss's name. That last one's personal." They took him out through a courtroom that did not make a sound. But as he passed the bench where Mara Whitfield sat with 2 children pressed against her sides and Elias Boone standing at her shoulder, Crowley stopped. He looked at her, the scullery girl, the woman off the train, the poor rough-handed nobody he had thrown into the dust, and for the first time all his charm was gone, and there was only the cold, ugly thing underneath. "You should have taken the coins," he said. Mara looked at him unafraid, one hand resting on Nell's dark hair. "I did take them, Mr. Crowley," she said quietly. "I picked up every one. And then I gave them back because they were never worth what you thought they'd buy." She held his gaze until he was the one to look away. "You judged my worth by my hands and my dress and my empty purse. You were the richest man in the territory, and you could not see the one thing standing right in front of you. And now you've lost everything to a horsebreaker and a schoolteacher's daughter and a clerk you never bothered to learn the name of." She did not smile. It would have been cruel, and she was not cruel. "That was your mistake. Not my dress. Not my hands. You never once looked at people hard enough to see them. And a man who cannot see people cannot see what they'll do when he corners them." Crowley had no answer. There was none to have. The marshal led him out into the summer street, and the crowd parted for them, and the door of the Gospel Creek courthouse swung shut behind the man who had owned them all. Judge Harmon banged his gavel one last time and dismissed the water claim as fraudulent, and ordered the dam destroyed and the spring restored to its rightful course, and directed that the whole matter be bound over to the federal court. And it was, as they say, over. Except it was not over quite, because when the crowd began to pour out into the street, buzzing, marveling, the same townspeople who had laughed at Mara on the platform now pressed toward her, wanting to shake her hand, to say they'd known all along. There was something fine about her, to claim a piece of the woman who'd brought down Silas Crowley, and Mara stood, and she did not take their hands. "You watched a man throw me in the dust," she said, not unkindly, but clear enough for all of them to hear. "And not one of you spoke a word. I don't hold it against you. Fear is a heavy thing, and Crowley made you all afraid. But I'll not stand here and be praised by the same mouths that laughed. I'd rather you remember what it felt like to say nothing, and I'd rather the next time you see someone thrown down in the dust, you remember it hard enough to step forward." She gathered the children. "That's all? That's the only thing worth taking from today." And the crowd went quiet and ashamed, which was more honest than their applause would have been. Outside in the hard, bright light of the summer street, Ellis Ward stood waiting by the horses, hat in his hands, not sure if he was free or bound. "Marshall says my turning witness counts for a great deal," he said to Elias Lowe. "Says I'll answer for the fence cutting, but the forgery and the rest fall on Dobbs and Crowley, not me. Says I might see the inside of a jail a short while and then walk free." He swallowed. "I got a little girl. I'd like to get home to her and never do a low thing like this again as long as I live." Elias looked at the young man who'd cut his fence and then ridden 2 days to bring the law. He put out his hand. "You did a wrong thing," Elias said. "And then you did a right one, and you did the right one when it was hard and it cost you. That's the whole of a man, Ward. Not that he never falls, that he gets up facing the right direction." They shook. "Go home to your girl." And Deacon Pyle, the clerk, stood a little apart, still trembling faintly, still not quite believing what he'd done, and it was Nell, small, quiet Nell, who walked over to him and took his shaking hand in both her small ones and looked up at him and said, "You were brave. My papa says being scared and doing it anyway is the bravest kind there is." And the clerk, who had spent his whole life being no one, bent down and wept right there in the street, because a child had called him brave. They left Gospel Creek that afternoon. They rode up out of the valley the same way they'd come down the mountain, rising blue and enormous ahead of them. But everything was different now. The tin case was empty. Its work was done, its contents bound for the federal court. The water would run again. The man who'd hunted them was in irons. And the woman a rich man had thrown into the dust rode up the mountain road with a child asleep against her chest, and another nodding behind her, and a quiet man beside her who kept looking over at her like he still couldn't believe she was real. "You didn't take their hands," Elias said after a long while. "Back there. The whole town wanting to praise you, and you turned them down flat." "I didn't come out here to be admired, Elias." Mara shifted the sleeping Nell higher against her shoulder. "I came out here because a man promised to marry me, and then threw me away. And what I found up your mountain was worth more than any admiration a town like that could give." She looked over at him. "I found out what I'm made of. That's a thing a person can only learn by being tested, and God knows this summer tested me down to the bone." "And what are you made of, Miss Whitfield?" Elias asked it quiet, almost afraid of the answer. "Now that you know." Mara looked ahead up the road toward the ranch and the burned barn they'd have to rebuild, and the spring that would run clear again, and the whole hard, beautiful life that waited up there. "Something that doesn't wash off," she said. "Turns out I'm made of something that doesn't wash off no matter how much dust a man throws." And Elias Boone laughed that rusty laugh gone smooth now with use, and up ahead the mountain caught the long gold light of the summer evening, and the four of them rode home. The rebuilding started the very next morning, and it was Mara who called the neighbors. She wrote the letters herself in her clear schoolteacher's hand to every rancher in the 3 valleys, whose stock had been dying for want of water all summer, and she sent them down with Ward on his way home. The letters said one thing plain: the spring that Crowley had stolen was flowing again, and Elias Boone meant to keep it open to the whole valley free forever, and any man who wanted to help raise a burned barn was welcome to come do it. Elias had not been sure. "They didn't lift a finger while Crowley bled us," he'd said. "Why would they come now?" "Because now it's safe to be decent. Mara had answered. Most people aren't wicked, Elias. They're just afraid. Take the fear away and you'd be surprised how many of them remember their neighbors. 11 wagons came up the mountain the following week. They came from valleys Elias had never set foot in, ranchers who'd watered their dying cattle at his restored spring and wanted to say thank you, the only way frontier men knew how, with their hands and their backs and a day's hard work. They raised the barn frame in a single morning, 20 men swarming the timbers, and the women came too and filled the yard with cook fires, and the children ran wild with Sam and Nell, and by evening there stood a barn better than the one that burned, and the smell of the burning was finally gone. Mara stood on the porch watching it, and she did not cry, but it was a near thing. An old rancher named Halloran came up beside her, hat in hand. "Ma'am," he said, "my herd would have been bones by August. My boys' herd too, and my brother's down in the far valley. That water saved 3 families I know of, and I don't know how many I don't." He turned his hat in his hands. "I heard what you said in the courthouse, about how nobody stepped forward. I was one of them, didn't?" He met her eyes. "I'm stepping forward now. Little late. But I'm here." "That's all anyone can do, Mr. Halloran," Mara said gently. "Step forward when you finally can. It counts. It always counts." The news came down from the county seat in pieces over the next month, carried by every rider who passed. Crowley was bound over for federal trial and would not see freedom again. The forgery alone carried years, and the conspiracy and fraud stacked on top of it until even his money could not dig him out. His lands bought with cheated men's ruin were seized and sold, and the water rights he'd tried to steal were placed under a court decree that named the spring a shared resource of the 3 valleys protected in law, unable to be bought or dammed or sold by any man ever again. That last part was Mara's doing. She'd asked the marshal for it, and the marshal had asked the judge, and the judge, who did not forget a woman who could reason a fraud down to its pencil marks, had written it into the decree. "You could have claimed it," Elias said when he heard. "The water. It's on my land. You could have made us rich as Crowley ever dreamed of being. Instead, you gave it to the whole valley." "And what would we have become?" Mara asked. "Another Crowley sitting on the one thing everybody needs, deciding who drinks and who doesn't." "No." She shook her head. "Water's not a thing to own, Elias. It's a thing to share. That's the whole lesson of this summer, if it had one. Crowley wanted to own what ought to be shared, and it rotted him from the inside out." She looked out over the green coming back to the valley. "I'd rather be poor and able to look my neighbors in the eye." Dobbs went to prison too, and the drunken forger from Cheyenne was found and arrested. Sheriff Tull, who'd confessed to save his own skin, lost his badge and his standing, but kept his freedom and left the territory for good, with his ledger of bribes still ringing in the ears of the town he'd betrayed. Ward served 3 short months and went home to his little girl, and wrote Elias a letter every Christmas after for years, and never once did another low thing as long as he lived. And Deacon Pyle, the trembling clerk who'd found his courage too late and used it anyway. Pyle became, of all things, the man the whole valley trusted to keep its record straight, because a town that had watched him stand up to Crowley knew there was not a crooked bone left in him. The mountain healed. The spring ran clear and strong, its old waterline climbing back up the rock week by week, until it reached the scar it had left a foot above the low mark, and then past it. The well filled. The grass came back. And when the summer finally broke, it broke with a rain that came sweeping up the valley on a gray afternoon in late August. The first real rain in 4 months, and the whole family stood out in it and let it soak them to the skin. And Sam and Nell danced in the mud like wild things, and Elias tipped his face up to the sky and closed his eyes, and Mara watched him, and understood that some prayers take a whole hard summer to answer. It was that evening, with the rain still ticking off the eaves, and the children finally asleep, and the valley below washed clean and glistening, that Elias Boone finally said the thing he'd been carrying since a train platform in June. They were on the porch. They were often on the porch in the evenings, in the quiet. After the children slept, it had become their hour, the one they didn't speak of, but both guarded. "I've got to say a thing," Elias said, "and I've been trying to find the words for 2 months, and I still ain't found good ones, so you'll have to take the plain ones." Mara went still. "All right. When I brought you up here, I told you I wasn't asking for a wife. I was asking for a mother for my children, and I meant it, and it was true." He turned his hat in his hands. He still did that when a thing mattered, and then deliberately he set the hat down on the rail and left his hands empty, because a man ought to say a thing like this with nothing to hide behind. But that ain't true anymore. Ain't been true for a long while. I don't know the exact day it changed. Maybe when you went down that well. Maybe when you stood in the doorway and dared a killer to shoot you. Maybe the very first evening when you told my Nell that dust washes off. His voice roughened. "I'm not asking you to mother my children anymore, Mara. They've got you already. They love you like you grew them, and you love them the same, and that's done and settled and needs no asking." He looked at her straight. "I'm asking for the thing I said I wouldn't ask for. I'm asking you to marry me. Not because the children need a mother. Because I need you. Because I can't picture a single morning of the rest of my life that don't have you in it, and I've stopped trying to." The rain ticked off the eaves. Mara was quiet a long moment, and Elias's heart, she could see, was in his throat, this huge, brave man who'd faced down armed riders now terrified of one small woman's answer. "When Cruelly threw those coins in the dust," she said slowly, "I told him I wasn't for sale, and I meant it. I'd rather have starved than be a thing a man bought to decorate his table." She stood and came to stand in front of him close. "So understand what I'm about to say, Elias Boone. I am not saying yes because you saved me. You didn't save me. I want that plain between us for the rest of our lives. I climbed into your wagon my own self. I went down that well my own self. I stood in that doorway my own self. You never once saved me." She reached up and laid her rough, work-worn hand against his rough, unshaven cheek. "You did something better. You stood beside me. From the very first hour, you were the one man in that whole town who stood beside me instead of stepping back. And a woman can spend her whole life being rescued and never once be seen. You saw me, Elias. You're the only one who ever did." Then his voice broke. "Is that a yes, or is that the kindest no a man ever got?" And Mara Whitfield, who had come west to be a decoration and been thrown in the dust for having working hands, who had gone down a dry well and crawled through a dark mountain and stared down a killer over the heads of 2 sleeping children, who had brought the richest man in the territory to his knees with nothing but her wits and her nerve and her refusal to be made small. Mara laughed, and the sound of it was pure joy, and she said, "It's a yes, you stubborn mountain of a man. But on one condition, and I'll hold you to this one, same as I held you to the door that locks. Name it, Aim. The ranch goes in both our names, the land, the spring rights, all of it yours and mine, equal in law on paper, so that no man on this earth can ever again decide my worth, or tell me where I stand, or throw me off with a handful of coins." She held his eyes. "Not because I don't trust you. I trust you more than I've trusted any living soul. But because I will never again be a woman whose whole life sits in someone else's hand. I'll be your wife, Elias. I'll be your equal. I will never again be anyone's dependent." She lifted her chin. "Those are my terms. Take them or carry me back down to that platform yourself like you promised." Elias Boone looked at her a long moment in the rain-washed evening light. Then he threw back his head and laughed. The rusty laugh gone rich and free. Now a sound the mountain had not heard in years, and he took both her hands in his enormous ones, and he said, "Ma'am, I'd sign that paper in my own blood if the law'd take it, both our names, equal, in law and in life, and in every morning I've got left." He drew her in. "I never wanted to own you, Mara. I wanted to stand beside you. That's all I ever wanted. From the first minute I saw you throw a rich man's money back in his teeth." They were married 3 weeks later, under the aspen where Sarah slept, because Mara had asked for it there. "She was part of this family before I ever came," she'd said, "and she gave you those children, and I'll not build my happiness by pretending she never was. We'll say her name at our wedding, and we'll say it to the children all their lives, and there'll be room enough in this family for her memory and my love both. A heart's not a coin, Elias. It doesn't run out when you spend it. And Elias, who had loved one good woman and buried her under that tree, understood in that moment exactly how rare the second one was. The whole valley came to the wedding. Halloran gave the bride away, having appointed himself to the office, and old Ada from the settlement wept into her shawl. And Deacon Pyle read from his broken-spined Bible in a voice that only shook a little, and Marshal Prentice rode 2 days to attend, and stood in the back with his hat off and something almost like a smile under his gray mustache. Sam carried the ring on a pillow and lost it twice. Nell scattered wildflowers and ate several. When it came time for the vows, Nell tugged at Mara's skirt and would not be hushed until Mara knelt down to hear her.
"Are you my mama now?"
the little girl whispered.
"For real and forever, not just for helping."
And Mara Whitfield, on her wedding day, under the summer aspen, with the whole valley watching, took the small face in both her hands and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "For real, for forever, for always and no matter what. I picked you, Nell Boone, and your brother and your papa out of the whole wide world, and I'll never unpick you. Not ever. You hear me? You're mine now, and I am yours. And that is the one thing in this life that will never ever wash off." Nell threw her arms around her neck, and Sam barreled into them both, and Elias gathered the whole tangle of them up in his arms, the way he had that first terrible morning by the well, and the valley cheered, and somewhere overhead the aspen leaves turned silver in the summer wind, like they were applauding too. Years later, many years, when Sam had a spread of his own down valley, and Nell had grown into a tall, clear-eyed woman who read faces the way her mother had taught her when the spring still ran free for everyone. And Crowley was a story parents told their children about what greed does to a man. Years later, a young woman would come through the valley on the stage alone, poor cast off by someone who'd promised her better, sitting in the dust of the station with nowhere left to go. And Mara Boone Gray, now but straight-backed, still would be the one to cross that platform and kneel down beside her and take her hand. Because she had never forgotten what it was to be the one in the dust. And she had never forgotten that the whole of her life had turned on one man choosing to step forward when everyone else stepped back. "Get up now," she'd say to the girl gently, the way no one had said it to her until Elias did. "Get up out of that dust. I know exactly how heavy it feels. But I'll tell you the truest thing I know, and it's the thing that carried me through the hardest summer of my life." She'd help the girl to her feet. A person's worth is never ever decided by the one who throws them away. It's decided by what they choose to build after they've been left behind. And child, she'd smile, you have no idea yet how much you're about to build. That was the truth Mara Whitfield learned in the summer dust of Wyoming, and it was the truth she lived by every day of the long, full, love-crowded life that followed. That no man's rejection can measure a soul, that worth is not given, but proven. And that the ones who are thrown down in the dust are so often the very ones who rise to build something 100 times finer than anything their betrayers ever dreamed. And Mara Boone, who had arrived with one suitcase and no coins, and not a single friend, built exactly that, and knew to the last day of her life that she had been worth every bit of it all along.